When I was around 12, I had the only bedroom in the house that wasn't on the second floor. My parents' house was a high ranch, so when you entered, it split off into 2 floors. One half flight of stairs going upstairs and one downstairs. The downstairs level had the den, the garage, my bedroom, and a bathroom. The other 3 bedrooms in the house were all upstairs. Since I was the oldest and the only boy in the house with 2 sisters, I got the room downstairs because it was the biggest and technically the coolest room. After I turned 10, my parents gave my twin bed to my little sister, and I got a full-size bed, which was a bit of an upgrade because the room was big and could certainly fit a bigger bed. When I was 12, my little sisters were around 5 and 8. At this age, I was allowed to be home alone, but my 5-year-old sister wouldn't be left alone with me, and my 8-year-old sister would only be left alone with me if my parents weren't going to be gone for too long. If they'd be gone for longer periods, one of my parents would take both of my sisters. For a short period, I'd say like 3 nights in a row, maybe a little more, I was waking up in the middle of the night for no reason and had trouble falling back asleep. Considering I was 12 years old, I knew I shouldn't have been having sleeping problems at that age. I was sleeping with the fan on next to my bed because it was a hot couple of days in the middle of the summer, so I wasn't sure what exactly was waking me up. Considering the fan provided a steady white noise. One of these nights I got up after waking up to refill my glass of water. I went to the bathroom right outside my bedroom, and as I was filling it up, I thought I heard something come from inside my room. I turned off the faucet and listened, but now there was nothing, just the sound of the fan. I walked to the doorway of my bedroom, and I couldn't tell what it was, but something was creeping me out about my room now. So I went upstairs to the living room and decided to sleep on the couch that night. I fell asleep eventually, but that same night, I woke up again to noises from the kitchen. I saw the glow of the light from the fridge and the sounds of someone rummaging through it. The way that floor was set up had the kitchen out of view from the couch in the living room, so I couldn't see who was there. I heard the fridge door eventually shut. Then footsteps walked away and downstairs. I was drowsy, so I went back to sleep. I believe it was the next day when my mom was folding clothes in my room, and she told me my room stunk and that I needed to clean up whatever that smell was. I ignored her because I really didn't smell anything. I wish I hadn't ignored her, though. That night, our dad put the air conditioning on because it was simply too hot. After we all watched a movie as a family, everyone started getting ready for bed. I went to my room and played video games for a little while before getting sleepy. By that time, I turned off the TV and console and rolled on my side to go to sleep like I always did. Tonight, I didn't have the fan on because the air conditioning was on, so there was just the sound of the air blowing out from the vents in the ceiling. I fell asleep, but once again, I woke up not long after. I didn't know what the sound I heard was. All I heard was the vent fan blowing air. Then, when it stopped blowing air, the room was silent, and I heard something breathing, but it wasn't my breathing. I looked around the room. The closet door was shut, so there was no way it was coming from there. Part of my childlike innocence assumed it was my younger sister playing a prank. I got on the floor and looked in the one place I could think to look, under the bed. I lifted the little piece of cloth that dangles at the bottom of the bed, and there was a very large person laying underneath my bed on a pile of blankets. Their head was facing me, but their eyes were closed. I fell backward and basically crab-walked out of the room, screaming, "Dad!" I heard my parents' door swing open, and my parents yelling, concerned. I pointed into my room and said, "Under the bed." And my dad went and pulled out this very large, dirty-looking man. I remember my dad quite easily physically forcing the man outside, as my mom called 911. I'm sure he went to jail for a while, or maybe not because he was homeless. Who knows? This did a lot of mental damage to me. I didn't even want to sleep in my own room anymore, let alone in that house. I had to sleep in the middle of my parents for a while. Then my dad installed security cameras all over the house. We threw out everything that was opened in the fridge because we had no idea what he put his mouth on in there. The fear of someone being under my bed stayed with me for a long time, years to come. We don't even know how long he was hiding under my bed. It could have been a few days. The smell, the person going through the fridge, the randomly waking up every night for a few days. Whether he meant harm or not, having someone hiding under your bed is every child's biggest nightmare. This story is from my great-grandfather, who is currently at the ripe old age of 101. He's told this story at family gatherings for years. He's from the city of Yaroslavl in Russia. I guess it was the Soviet Union when he was born there. Being from the USSR, of course, he served under the Soviet Union during World War II, then fled to the United States a few years after to escape communism. He told me this story again recently. It had been not long after the Battle of Ilikiluki, which wasn't a major battle of the war, but it still ended up in a large amount of Soviet and German bloodshed, as most battles at the time did. It was the evening, and according to my great-grandfather, it was very cold that night, like hellish cold. They were in a small house building that was one of the few with no damage to it, which made it nice because it was warm. Him and his comrades were celebrating with drinks, songs, laughing, and joking, what you could imagine a celebration would look like. At some point in the evening, two fellow soldiers walked into the building. My great-grandfather and his friend Sergei didn't care for these two. It was apparently because they were loudmouths and were just unpleasant guys. Sergei asked my great-grandfather if he wanted to go out and have a smoke. He agreed, and the two put on their heavy coats and walked out into the freezing cold air. My great-grandfather pulled out a cigarette, as did Sergei, and then he lit both of their cigarettes. They were talking for a while, both enjoying their cigarette and basking in the glory that came along with winning the battle that had been going on for about 2 months. After my great-grandfather finished his cigarette, they were both about to go back inside when they heard what sounded like a man scream from the woods in the distance. Fearing that it was the scream from one of their comrades possibly being attacked by a patrol of pissed-off Germans, they went back inside quickly and grabbed their guns. Because there might be armed Germans, they got a bunch more of their fellow soldiers to run into the woods with them. My great-grandpa mentioned that as he got deeper into the woods, he started to get a weird feeling like dread and fear. When they couldn't hear screaming anymore, my great-grandpa suggested that they all split into duos and search for whoever it was. Sergei went with him while the others went off in their own duos. After about 2 minutes of walking through the dark, cold woodlands, my great-grandpa said that he could hear faint crying, like someone was in pain. Sergei heard this too, so they walked to where they heard the crying sounds. They started seeing drops of blood in the snow, so they both began to take the situation as more of a threat than they were earlier. It still gives me chills when my great-grandpa tells me this part. When him and Sergei got to the source of the crying sound, they found the most bizarre and disturbing scene they had ever witnessed. 2 German soldiers on the ground, one of them dead, one alive. One of them had their uniforms ripped and bloodied. The alive one was cowering by a tree, muttering stuff in German. He didn't notice my great-grandpa and Sergei right away. My great-grandpa then walked towards the other body. The corpse was horrifically mutilated, missing limbs, skin ripped off the face. His uniform was shredded, and it looked like he had been scalped. Another thing that stood out to my great-grandpa was the smell. He couldn't describe the smell, saying it wasn't like a dead body, but more like chemicals. The corpse looked fresh. Sergei investigated the living soldier, who, upon noticing Sergei, jumped back in terror, as if he had been traumatized. He was shouting stuff in German. It was only then that my great-grandpa noticed that his leg had been torn apart, and his chest was bloody. He said he could remember that German screaming something like "Das Kolas," or something similar. Sergei pulled out his pistol and put the German out of his misery with a single shot to the head. Almost immediately, after this, my great-grandpa described hearing moaning-like noises. That's when a very tall thing started running in the darkness away from them. Afraid, Sergei and my great-grandpa started shooting erratically in the direction of the thing. The other men ran over, but the thing was gone. All the men were reprimanded when they got back to the village, but a report was sent to the high command. It was never investigated further. My great-grandpa claims that it was the most terrifying experience of his life. He still feels stressed when thinking back on the sight of that mangled German and that mysterious thing.